Hello, I'm Sky Matsuhashi, founder of SmartPokerStudy.com, the place for poker players who are always striving to be better today than they were yesterday. Poker people, before you listen to this episode on steal stats, make sure you learn from episode 96, where I broke down poker steals and explained why you need to be stealing much more than you already are. Hey, poker people, you rock super hard for all the great iTunes comments you leave, subscribing and downloading and sharing the show with your poker pals, and thanks for subscribing in YouTube as well, and for retweeting and, favoriting my tweets. So, I've got to apologize for skipping an episode last week. A sinus infection and losing my voice and a constant headache. It really put me out of commission, but I'm back, baby, and I'm not 100%, but it's, I'm not too shabby either already. So today is class 2 of MED number 2, Stealing Blinds. Before we get to the meat of today's podcast, I want to discuss something that should be very important to all of you who want to improve your game just a little bit every single day. There's a learning concept that I follow rigorously, and it's called Purposeful Practice. As a matter of fact, this whole series of MED podcasts, it's centered around this concept. Purposeful practice is the idea of spending your practice time on a specific skill or task in order to ingrain it into your skill set. If your practice was all about quantity and putting time in, we'd all be expert poker players by now with all the hours on the felt that we've logged in. I imagine most of you have heard of the 10,000 hour rule. Well, if simply putting 10,000 hours into something made you an expert, everyone in their late 30s would be an expert driver with all the time they've spent on the road since they were age 16 or so. But is this the case? Hell no. Take my wife. Please! Old jokes. They die hard. Anyway, yeah, so myself and my wife, terrible drivers, been driving forever. We've at least put in 10,000 hours each. And, we ain't any better. Anywho, we would be perfect A-plus drivers by now if that were the case, the whole 10,000 hour thing. And that's obviously not so. Then, a question for you, who makes the best drivers? Probably commercial drivers who do it for a living and who've trained in it, and maybe whose livelihood depends on safe and efficient driving in all types of conditions. And I imagine stunt drivers and race car drivers as well, because when they're behind the wheel, they want to, they don't want to just get from point A to B. They want to do it safely and quickly, while anticipating and reacting to road conditions and dangerous situations and that kind of stuff. So my point is that the way most of us play and study poker just isn't building the skills the way we'd like them to. So that's where purposeful practice comes into play. And there are 4 parts to purposeful practice that we should be implementing. Part 1 is starting with a clear goal. If your current poker league is maybe you call blind steals too wide, or you never even try to steal, then why are you studying c-betting or short stacked play, or watching videos on deep tournament runs by one of your favorite pros? If you really want your practice to mean something, then set a goal, like lowering your call to bet percentage in the blinds, or improving your steal success percentage. There's also a great idea I've discussed before, which I learned from the book called The One Thing, and of course that was way back in episode number 3. The idea from the book that I learned is the focusing question. That's a question that you ask yourself to really focus in on what you need to do, or in this case, what you need to study. So the question that I want you to ask yourself is, what's the one thing I can study right now such that by learning it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? The answer to that is your next study goal. So part 2 of purposeful practice, or the second part of it, is plan your work and work your plan. So you've got your goal. Now plan your studies by selecting videos, articles, podcasts, chapters from books, people to discuss, whatever it is. You want to select your study content from things that should teach you all the info and skills that you're missing in relation to the goal you set. You'll want to take notes on all you've learned as well, so you can refer back to them in the future. Also, do hand history reviews centered around your specific goal. In the case of improving your steals, filter your PokerTracker 4 database for your steal attempts. You need to analyze the hands and figure out why they were unsuccessful, and think of things you can do better in the future. Part 3 of Purposeful Practice is challenge yourself. And this is key. I want you to challenge yourself to improve this area, whatever it is, improve this area of your play. Put yourself in situations where you can practice what you've learned. Try to teach others what you've learned via study groups, Facebook groups, and even forum posts if you like. You're used to playing and discussing things the way you always have. Now is your chance to push your limits and try to learn in more dynamic and impactful ways. And Purposeful Practice Part 4 is measure your progress. You need to measure your progress in some way, some quantifiable way. Otherwise, you won't know if you're improving. So you've got to find specific quantifiables that can indicate whether you're headed in the right direction or not. For improving your stealing, there are some important stats that you can pull from your database to analyze your performance as you study and continue to play. One of them might be the attempt to steal percentage, whether it needs to go down or up based on your goal. Another one is your steal success percentage. And another one, of course, the number one win rate, when it comes to cash games at least, is your big blind per 100 hands win rate in the cutoff, the button, and the small blind. And that is Purposeful Practice for you. I'd like to see you start using these 4 steps beginning this week if you aren't already. Whatever your goal is, set it, make a plan, challenge yourself, and measure that progress. Good luck! And now on to today's blind stealing class number 2. So in the prior episode, class number 1, we discussed how blind stealing can improve your overall win rate, how to have a blind stealing mindset, and which players to target. I also got into some break-even math and gave you a great way to study your steal spots and the opportunities presented to you. And I hope you watched that stealing focus session video that I sent out within the weekly boost. So in today's podcast, we'll dive into the steal and steal defense stats that I use in my HUD and my steal pop-up. I'll tell you the exact stats I use to steal effectively versus my opponents, and I'll show you what my steal pop-up looks like so you can emulate it for your own use in Poker Tracker 4 or in Hold'em Manager 2, of course. So make sure you hit the show notes page for everything I discussed today, along with screenshots and links at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod97. While you're there, you can sign up for the weekly boost for exclusive strategy content delivered directly to your inbox. Okay, let's get to it, and gambate, everybody.
And now for our feature presentation.
So let's talk about my personalized steal pop-up for Poker Tracker 4. This pop-up was designed to give me the best information for determining how likely my blind steals will work, as well as how often my opponents choose to steal for themselves. The pop-up displays when I click on the fold to steal stat in my table HUD. If you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, and all this is jargon, maybe it's going in one ear and out the other, or it's going over your head and you're not as quick as Drax the Destroyer, so you just can't catch it, then download and listen to episode 51, where I gave you 5 ways to improve your game with Poker Tracker 4. This is a very informative podcast, and if you have no idea what HUDs or pop-ups are, you will after listening to it. Once again, that's episode 51. And of course, if this is jargon to you, you might be, or if what I'm about to talk about is jargon to you, you might be a live player. So what I want you to do, even though you're a live player, you don't play online, you don't use a HUD, you don't have pop-up, you don't use stats, but I still want you to listen and learn. You really can learn from any type of poker content out there. Take Alex Fitzgerald, for example. The guy is an MTT master, MTT coach. He gives tons of MTT strategy. Well, a lot of that stuff that he discusses, that's also applicable to cash games. It's also applicable to Omaha or PLO or stud games as well. You can learn from any content and apply it to your own game. John Buprez over there at PLO Quick Pro, the guy discusses so much awesome stuff, not only good for PLO, but I've learned a lot from him for No Limit Hold'em. And of course, there's Andrew Brokus and Nate Mavis at thinkingpoker.net with their podcast and the thinkingpoker.net page. There's so much great information. In the last podcast, or it might have been 2 podcasts ago, they discussed some Omaha 8 or better hands. And while those aren't directly applicable to No Limit Hold'em, a lot of the way that these 2 guys, how they discuss poker and how they think about poker, that can actually inform the way that you start to think about No Limit Hold'em. Just because they're applying their ideas to Omaha 8 doesn't mean that you can't apply those same ideas to to No Limit Hold'em. So what you should do with every piece of poker content out there, you should be able to adapt the information for your own game type and stakes, of course. People talk about high stakes strategies. Well, a lot of those can be adapted to the low stakes as well. And of course, all of these concepts that I'm talking about today, whether they're stats or the pop-up, all the different stats and percentages, these steel concepts for online play are easily adaptable to live play as well. You might hear me mention something today that you've never thought of before. Oh my gosh, I never realized that this guy in the small blind who 3-bets my steals a lot, he's actually 3-bet re-stealing. I never thought of that. You probably did, but, I'm just saying, some of the stuff I talk about can jog something, can trigger something in your mind to help you with your live play. So you live players, stick around. Don't stop the podcast just yet. Okay, so back to the pop-up, my steel pop-up. It's broken down into 3 sections. The top section is for attempt to steal stats. The middle section is for defend versus steal stats. And the bottom is some post-flop stats to help us plan. And of course, go to the show notes for today to see a screenshot of this so you can easily visualize and follow along there. So for the top section, which is the attempt to steal section, there are 2 stats within it. The first is the attempt to steal percentage. So this is here to help me deal with somebody trying to steal my blinds. If the attempt to steal is below 15%, 15%, I treat this more like a value-oriented raise from a steal position, and I'll react accordingly. If it's between 15 and 27%, and that's kind of middle of the road is what I think of it as, so I'll defend with caution there. If it's over 27%, I'll defend a lot wider by calling more and 3-betting a whole lot more. But before I defend, I'll also look at the next stat within this section. And that stat is the steal and fold to 3-bet stat. So they put out the steal raise and then they fold to somebody's 3-bet. This stat is here to show me how often they fold to 3-bets when stealing. It's pretty obvious, If I'm on the fence about defending, a high percentage with this stat, it might persuade me to 3-bet re-steal. By high percentage, I'm talking about anything over 75%. Between 50 and 75%, then my 3-bet re-steal will work a little less often and might not be exactly worth it with any 2 cards. And of course, anything below 50%, and I'll generally call to defend or 3-bet for value and expect lots of calls or 4-bets, and I'll get that value right there. So moving on to the middle section, this is the defend versus steal section. So when I'm stealing, this is the main section I look at when I'm opening in the cutoff, the button, or the small blind. And there are 4 stats within this section. The first one is the fold to steal percentage. I look at this stat more than any other defense stat because it really is the most telling. I love it when this number is over 65%, and the higher the better, because I steal pretty liberally from guys like this, and I love seeing those high fold to steal percentage numbers. Oh, and I should have mentioned too, I didn't say it earlier, all of these stats that I have right here, for example, the first one was the attempt to steal, then the steal fold to 3-bet, then the fold to steal percentage, and all the other ones I'm talking about, I have them broken out by position. So for attempt to steal, I see the total percentage, but I also see the attempt to steal in the cutoff, the button, and the small blind. For the steal and then fold to a 3-bet, cutoff, button, and small blind. For the fold to steal, I see it as a total, but I also see in the small blind and the big blind. So my pop-up, if you're not looking at it, I really suggest you go to the show notes for this page. Take a look at it. It'll show exactly what I'm talking about. All the stats, the totals, along with the percentages right next to it. So the fourth stat in the defend versus steal section, the second stat in the section and the fourth stat overall is the call steal percentage. And this is here because I like to see the way their defending frequencies break down. When you compare how often they call steals and 3-bet against them, then you can find some glaring frequency issues. For example, let's say they fold to steal 70% of the time. That means they defend 30% of the time, and they defend by either calling or 3-betting. But if this 30%, if it's broken down maybe as 15% calling and 15% 3-betting, then I have no idea of the ranges they choose to call or 3-bet with. Because, it's hard to read a player when their range is 50-50 over a good sample. But if the 3-bet is at 4% and the calling is at 26%, then it's pretty evident that they only 3-bet for value versus steals, but they call a wide range of junky hands. So it's great to see this call steal percentage. And now that stat, the call steal percentage, that actually leads us to the third stat in this middle section, which is the 3-bet versus steal percentage. By comparing how often they 3-bet in general to their 3-betting versus steals, then you know how aggressive they are versus the steals. You'll sometimes come across players who 3-bet only maybe a total of 6% of the time, but versus steals, they 3-bet 15%. These guys love the re-steal, and they're probably looking for opponents with a high attempt to steal percentage. You could take advantage of these high 3-bet re-stealers by throwing out that steal and then liberally 4-betting them and expecting them to fold most of the time. You can also just flat every one of their 3-bets and take it post-flop with position on them, often with a stronger range, of course. And this is especially profitable if they've got some glaring post-flop weaknesses, which we'll get to that in just a little bit. Okay, so the fourth stat in this middle section, all about defending versus steals, is the big blind fold to small blind steal percentage. And this is here for the specific case of stealing from the small blind versus the big blind. Of course, the higher the better for this percentage, but I'll often keep my small blind steals to aces, kings, and queens, all pairs, lots of suited connectors and gappers, as well as Broadway hands. I'll only steal with any 2 cards when this big blind fold to small blind steal stat, when it's alarmingly high, like 80 to 85%. These players see a monster under the bed every time the small blind open raises, so I'm going to scare them by opening and expecting a fold most of the time. And then for this steal pop-up, the final section, the bottom section, that's all dedicated to post-flop play. And there are 4 stats here within this section. The first one is the in-position C-bet. So the C-bet stats tell me how aggressive the player is post-flop as the pre-flop aggressor. I've got it here for in position and out of position so that I can use this to help me plan for the flop, the turn, and the river play. It's always good to have a plan pre-flop before you get to the flop. And I use all 3 of these streets to tell me which street my opponent is normally honest on. And so, like I said, I have this in position and out of position. So those are the first 2 stats in this fourth section. And the next 2 stats are my in position fold to C-bet and my out of position fold to C-bet. So it's kind of the same thing as the C-bet stats. The fold to C-bet stats are here by street as well, flop, turn, river, and this helps me plan for post-flop action. If a player has a glaring post-flop frequency issue, like maybe he folds to C-bets out of position 70% of the time or higher, then I will steal very liberally, knowing that if I get called, they give up a heck of a lot on the flop. Alright, so that completes my steal pop-up. Once again, if you're not at the show notes, you're missing out because if you follow along with that screenshot as I discuss it all, it'll be a little bit more clear to you. And as a bonus for this week's podcast companion video, I'll be sending out a steal pop-up video detailing my pop-up in all of its glory. I'll even get into showing you how to make adjustments and changes to your pop-ups and, within Poker Tracker 4. And make sure that you sign up for the weekly boost through the show notes to get this companion video. I'll probably be sending it out on Friday. So to wrap up my steal pop-up talk, make sure you hit the show notes, get a copy of that screenshot right there, and go ahead and emulate it, or, just copy it for your own pop-up within Poker Tracker 4 and for Hold'em Manager. Or better yet, you can purchase my Smart HUD for cash games, full ring tourneys, and 6-max tourneys by going to www.smartpokerstudy.com/smarthud. It comes with a different custom HUD for each game, as well as 6 custom pop-ups. I use my HUD for every session I play, and I guarantee it'll be the best you ever use. So this wouldn't be the Smart Poker Study podcast if we didn't discuss some studying. So I want you to go to your Poker Tracker 4 or Hold'em Manager if you use it. Check out the HUDs and the pop-ups and see what stats are currently on them. If you do not have any of the stats I mentioned, and very important, if you don't have them broken out by position, like I said, get on it. Modify your HUD and your pop-ups to include all the most relevant stats, as well as the positions. And of course, this I guarantee, it'll aid in all of your stealing opportunities in-game. And of course, during your hand analysis, your off-the-table studying work and stuff, when you study those steal opportunities, having these better stats along with the positions in place will help you analyze the hands even better. Challenge! Here's my challenge to you for this episode. I just discussed adding stats and positional breakdowns to your HUD and steal pop-up. So get on it. That's your challenge for this week. No more using the default pop-ups in Poker Tracker 4 or Hold'em Manager. Color code and personalize them for your own game and the stakes you play. The more thought and work you put into this, the better information you'll get from your pop-ups. If you've got a steel pop-up you'd like my opinion on, please send me a screenshot or, email it to me. Send me a screenshot and I'd be happy to discuss it with you. Now it's your turn to take action and Scooby-Dooby do something positive for your poker game.
Now get it on.
Alright, just to recap the episode, I discussed purposeful practice and how you can put it to use in your poker studies. There were 4 parts to purposeful practice. Part 1, starting with a clear goal. Part 2, plan your work, work your plan. Part 3, challenge yourself. Part 4, measure your progress. After purposeful practice, I dove into my actual steel pop-up. I told you all the stats and the ranges I use, and I gave you a screenshot of it so you can emulate it for your own use. Don't be shy, I don't mind at all, and would actually be quite happy if many of you put it to use in your own games to steal more of dem blinds. So, if you're not already there, head on over to the show notes at smartpokerstudy.com/pod97 for that screenshot I told you about and links to everything mentioned today. Alright, thank you so much for listening today. I want your feedback, so hit me with it through the show notes, or you can send an email to sky@smartpokerstudy.com, tweet me at smartpokerstudy, or post in the Facebook group at smartpokerstudy.com/discuss. And I want them questions. The Q&As are starting up again this Friday, so send them on in. Okay, poker peeps, be sure to come back Friday for episode 98, which, like I just said, is another Q&A. Word of mouth is the best advertising, so thank you very much for sharing this show with other poker people. Your sharing and caring is what helps us grow. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.